Now the class is on record. Before I proceed, I would like to find out if I'm audible enough. Can you hear what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
Great. Now let's move on. I'm going to share my screen at this point. In our last class, we were talking about definitions. And their problems. Today, we are going to look at a couple of other issues we needed to handle before we begin to talk about arguments. Because really the business of this course is arguments, the business of arguing. Now today we're going to discuss a number of topics, but I have chosen the title, the normative and the empirical, as a sort of rough title for everything we're doing today. So in this session, we'll round up our analysis of the difference between values and facts. Remember, we talked about values and facts at the beginning of the semester. Values are about what we should or should not do. Facts are about what is or is not. Sometimes we mistake values for facts. There are factual statements with implicit value judgments. There are factual statements with implicit value judgments. Let's see an example. Look at the difference between the following two statements. The president has lifted the lockdown. And the second one, the president has rightly lifted the lockdown. So the first is a factual statement. The second is like the first, but with an implicit value judgment, represented by the word rightly. So the second is a value judgment. Now, so the only difference between the two sentences is the word rightly. That word signifies that a value judgment has taken place, even in a factual statement. So the first statement is a factual statement. The second one is a value judgment. So we should look out for both the explicit and implicit meanings of statements. If we don't confirm both the explicit and implicit kinds of meanings, we could be misled. Now, so you could see how important this distinction is to our business of thinking critically. Now let's look at metaphors and proverbs. So it is crucial to logical reasoning that we single out expressions that should not be interpreted literally. There are certain expressions we don't interpret literally. Two of such kinds of expressions are metaphors and proverbs. Now, so we need to know what they are in order to know how to handle them as logicians. Now, metaphors are sentences that should not be interpreted literally. Examples. Don't judge a book by its cover. So what we understand from that sentence is don't evaluate things just by looking at their appearances. It's raining cats and dogs. It's raining heavily. So we don't normally interpret these sentences by their literal meanings. A proverb is a sentence with a literal meaning as well as a non-literal one. And the non-literal meaning is usually a piece of advice. That means a proverb is a multiple purpose speech act. For examples, only a fool tests the depth of a river with two of his feet. It means don't embark on a venture without a proper reflection. Now, so the difference is that, for a proverb, the literal meaning is also very good. You can interpret a proverb literally, and you can also interpret it non-literally. So that's one major difference between a proverb and a metaphor. For metaphors, you don't interpret them literally. It takes a whole village to raise a child. The community is responsible for the moral upbringing of a child. No one can lick his or her own elbow. No person is an island. You need the assistance of other people in your life. So these are proverbs. Now, the intentions behind proverbs. Proverbs are mostly used to advise people, but proverbs are not always sincerely used. For instance, the proverb, "No one can lick his or her own elbow," can be used to encourage corruption or convince someone that it is impossible to fight corruption. So the intentions behind proverbs is not always good. A little exercise. Provide one example each of a metaphor and a proverb. How is a metaphor different from a proverb? Who can answer them? Any answers? An example of a metaphor and another example of a proverb. And then, how is a metaphor different from a proverb? Okay, so I guess you can do this exercise at a much later time. Now let's go on to the next item on the agenda, meaning defects in language. In addition to metaphors and proverbs, there are expressions whose meanings are defective. That is, apart from metaphors and proverbs, there are expressions whose meanings are defective. Two examples of defective meaning in expressions are vagueness and ambiguity. Vagueness and ambiguity. These are two defects, two meaning defects in language. We're going to see these two kinds of defects, as well as the difference between them. So we'll begin with vagueness. An expression is vague when its meaning has no boundaries of application. An expression is vague when its meaning is not precise. So an expression is vague when the meaning is not precise, and because of that, there is no boundary of applying it. That is, there's no boundaries that tell you where to apply it and where you cannot apply it. So it is precisely because the meaning of a vague expression is not precise that it has no boundaries of application. Examples: he will be here any moment from now. He will be here any moment from now. Any moment from now is not precise, so it has no boundary of application. Any moment from now can be from the next 1 second or the next 1 minute till Jesus Christ comes again. Okay, I'll come and see your parents at the right time. I'll come and see your parents at the right time. I mean, the person has not provided you with any useful information, because at the right time, it's not precise. You can't apply it anywhere. It has no clear boundary of application. That car is expensive. Expensive. Well, the only thing that the word expensive tells you is that something is the price of something is higher than it should be. But as to how high it is, you have no idea. Then ambiguity. A sentence is ambiguous when it is capable of more than one meaning. When a sentence is capable of more than one meaning, then it is ambiguous. Now, so this is a bit different from vagueness. This one is that something has a meaning, but it's not just one meaning, it is more than one. There are three types of ambiguity. We have lexical ambiguity, referential ambiguity, and syntactic ambiguity. Now, lexical ambiguity, if an ambiguity occurs in a single word, then it is called lexical ambiguity. In a single word. This type of ambiguity usually occurs in words that have The same spelling, but different meanings. These words are called homographs. When a single word has the same spelling, but different meanings, that word is called a homograph. All right. Examples. He lives close to the bank. He lives close to the bank, full stop. Does he live close to the river bank or a bank as a financial institution? So a single word has the same spelling, but two competing meanings. Military head, 6 arms. Now, this is a typical, typical banner or title of a newspaper article. Military head, 6 arms. Yeah. Let's assume you bought a newspaper and at the front page, this is what you see: military head, 6 arms. Is it the head of a military man or the head of the military as an institution? Now, is it the arms of a military man or weapons? So other homographs include race. When you talk about race, what do you mean? Is it the one in sports or the one that demarcates people with different skin colors? Then you have chest, you have light, and so on. Then we have referential ambiguity. This type of ambiguity occurs when a phrase or a word in a particular context could refer to 2 or more properties or things in a sentence. Referential ambiguity occurs from the use of pronouns, and quantifiers. Ambiguity can come from pronouns or other kinds of quantifiers. That is why you call them referential ambiguity. That is ambiguity that arises from referencing something. Let's see an example or examples. The boy told his father about the theft case, and he was very upset. Who is upset, the boy or the father? So the pronoun he does not specify which of the pronouns in the sentence it is referring to. Second example, he used deceit to sell the soap to me, but I did not buy it. He used deceit to sell the soap to me, but I did not buy it. What did I not buy? The deceit or the soap? So here too, the pronoun is to specify which noun it is referring to. So this is why we call this referential ambiguity. Then we have syntactic or sentential ambiguity. When a sentence contains 2 or more possible meanings, then the sentence is ambiguous. Syntactic or sentential ambiguity occurs when it is clear what the individual words in a sentence mean, but it is not clear what the whole sentence means. Examples. Today we shall be discussing violence on TV. We shall be discussing violence on TV. Is it that discussion of violence will be held on a TV program, or that violence on TV will be the topic of discussion? The dean will talk about cheating in the seminar room. The dean will talk about cheating in the seminar room. Is the dean going to talk about cheating that happened in the seminar room? Or is cheating the topic of the lecture she is going to deliver in the seminar room? Now, so what's the difference between vagueness and ambiguity? A vague term does not indicate a clear boundary of applying the meaning of a term. On the other hand, an ambiguous term gives us ideas of what it means, but suggests more than one accepted meaning, leaving us confused as to which of the meanings particularly is intended. So vagueness means no clear meaning. Ambiguity means more than one acceptable meaning. The role of vagueness and ambiguity in language. Vagueness and ambiguity can facilitate equivocation and disagreement in language. So these two defects, meaning defects, encourage a particular crime we call equivocation. And then it also encourages disagreements in language. The role of vagueness and ambiguity can also be found in metaphors and proverbs. So metaphors are intentionally vague, so that you'll be able to apply multiple meanings to them. Now, just give me a few seconds to see who is calling and why the person is calling. Okay, so I'm back. So we're saying that vagueness and ambiguity can facilitate equivocation and disagreement in language. And the role of vagueness and ambiguity can also be found in metaphors and proverbs. Now let's look at equivocation. Equivocation occurs when someone shifts unannounced from one meaning of a word to another meaning of the same word in the same passage. So when someone shifts unannounced from one meaning of a word to another meaning of the same word in the same passage, this is usually done with the hope of confusing the reader. Equivocation is to take advantage of ambiguity, because equivocation means taking advantage of the ambiguous nature of words to persuade or confuse readers. So we shall study now. So I'm talking about equivocation as in ordinary language, but we shall study equivocation as a form of argument later in chapter 12. So but let's see some examples of equivocation. Time flies like an arrow and fruit flies like a banana. So the equivocation here is based on the word flies. The first flies is a verb meaning moving in the air. Bismarck, do you have a question? Okay, so Bismarck is like Bismarck accidentally raised his hand. All right, so let's continue. So time flies like an arrow and fruit flies like a banana. The first flies is a verb meaning moving in the air. The second flies is a noun indicating fruit insects. So the first like is used for the purpose of comparison. The second like is used as a verb indicating a preference for something. Then another example, I'm celebrating my birthday in a gay manner because I'm gay. The first use of gay means happiness, and the second means the state of being homosexual. So the same word in the same sentence is used for different meanings. Strategy for identifying equivocation. First of all, ascertain whether a word has been used more than once in the sentence or passage. That is, if you are to identify equivocation, it has to involve a word that has appeared more than once. That's the first step for identifying equivocation. Then proceed to check if the word or expression has different meanings in the sentence or passage. If you are able to make these two observations, then the sentence or passage contains equivocation. Importance of identifying equivocation. Note that vagueness, ambiguity, and equivocation are very important in clarifying arguments. If certain expressions are vague or ambiguous in an argument, their meaning needs to be clarified before we can proceed to evaluate the argument. Some exercises determine whether each of the following is vague or ambiguous. One, we should raise tax on the rich. Two, I'll be back later. I'm renting the new apartment. Stolen jewel found by 3. Democracy is freedom for all. 2 vehicles collide, 1 died. So the first one, we should raise tax on the rich. So that one, it should be vague. I'll be back later is vague. I'm renting the new apartment. The new apartment. That's vague. Stolen jewel found by 3 is ambiguous. Democracy is freedom for all is vague. For all, for which all? 2 vehicles collide, 1 died. It's ambiguous. Is it 1 vehicle that died or 1 person? Court tries shooting defendant. It's ambiguous. Now let's go to senses of law. We need to understand the different ways in which we use the word law. A champion.
Yeah, please. Can you go back to the other slide, the previous one? Yes, yes. It says stolen jewel found by 3 is ambiguous. But please, he said it's ambiguous.
Yeah, it's ambiguous.
Yes. I thought that like we do not know the particular tree. So how is it ambiguous?
Is the stolen jewel found? Is it found beside a tree, or is it that it was a tree that found the stolen jewel?
Okay.
All right. So senses of law. We need to understand different ways in which we use the word law. 7 senses. We have 7 senses of law. We have natural law, civil law, cultural norm, conventional or social rule, customary law, moral law, logical law, mathematical law, divine law. So let's just quickly, this thing about law, it prepares us for a very advanced level of, at an advanced stage. It's not something we really need for other purposes this semester. So we just go through it and then we move on. Definition of law. We have no single definition of law. It depends on which sense of law you have in question. So we'll treat the different senses along with their definition. So if you want to say, define what law is, you can't, because we have up to 6 different senses of law. Each one has its definitions. Natural laws. These are also called scientific laws. They refer to statements describing the regularity or uniformity in the patterns of events or properties of things in the world. So natural laws refer to statements that describe how the world works. We form these laws based on past experiences. If, for instance, you observe that the sun always rises in the east and sets in the west, then that's a natural or scientific law. So natural or scientific laws are statements describing the regularity or uniformity in the patterns of events or properties of things in the world. Other examples of natural law: planets revolve around the sun. The atomic weight of gold is 12. Animals survive on oxygen. Anything that has weight falls to the ground if suspended in the air. Then we have civil or statutory laws. These are laws made by man to regulate human behavior. As usually legal instruments accompanied by sanction and backed by force. So this is the kind of law you study in the law school. Examples: you have commercial law, tax law, criminal law, corporate law, constitutional law, traffic law, human rights law, and so on. They must be obeyed by all citizens, and they are accompanied by prescribed punishment for disobedience. Then we have cultural norms, social conventions, or social rules. These are common understandings about how we should do certain things, whether in traditional societies, in the case of cultural norms, or in modern societies, in the case of social conventions. And any society, group, organization, or institution, social rules. Disobedience is not normally punishable, but attracts social disapproval. Examples: how we should dress, speak, receive visitors, worship, eat, observe public holidays, attend social functions, and so on. So we said that cultural norms, social conventions, or social rules are common understandings about how we should do certain things. That is why their disobedience is not punishable, but it attracts social disapproval. So let's assume, for instance, you come to lecture and you are smelling, showing you've not been taking your bath for several days. Well, there's no punishment for that, but people will frown at you. There will be social disapproval. And the social disapproval is like a kind of punishment. So that is what the disapproval from people is, what will teach you a lesson to stop it. Customary law, when a cultural norm becomes a civil law. So it becomes statutory. So there are certain cultural norms that are transformed into civil laws. It becomes statutory, and its disobedience becomes punishable. Now remember that cultural norm is not punishable. But if you transform it into a civil law, then it becomes punishable. We have customary courts in rural areas. Examples of cultural norms that could become customary law are the powers of a chief, traditional marriage rights and duties. So those things could be transformed into law. They would no longer be mere expectations, that you are free to breach and then you go scot-free, or people just insult you and you ignore them. If they are transformed into civil laws, then your disobeying or breaching them will attract definite punishment. Moral law. There's no universally accepted definition of moral law, but moral law are about rules prescribing how we should or should not behave. So usually for a rule of behavior to be regarded as a moral law, such a rule is universally respected. So for something to be a moral law, it should be universally respected. Examples: do not steal, kill, discriminate, or take another person's spouse, and so on. So there are certain things that we don't do in our communities. And it's not just in our communities. Wherever you go in the world, people don't do them in their own communities as well. So when you notice something that is so universally accepted in every community, even without a global discussion or deliberation, then that thing is a moral law. It is people are practicing it everywhere, because without it, if you don't do it, then there will be problems in the society. Logical law. These are rules for reasoning. The most common examples are deductive and inductive reasoning, which we shall be doing in a few, in fact, our next class is on deductive reasoning. Example of deductive reasoning: all men are mortal. Kofi is a man, Kofi is mortal. All men are mortal. Kofi is a man, Kofi is mortal. This is deductive reasoning. Now, it is called deductive reasoning because if you say all men are mortal, and you also say Kofi is a man, then the conclusion that Kofi is mortal is just a matter of deduction. You just deduct it from the two statements, like you do in mathematics. So it's not a complex argument. There's no controversy about the argument. There's nobody who can't accept the argument. We have mathematical laws. These are rules for mathematical operations. Example: never divide by 0. All the rules of addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and so on. So all those rules are mathematical laws. Divine laws. Divine laws are laws credited with a supernatural source. Examples depend on the religion in question. So every religion have their own divine laws. For example, in Christianity, there are laws about relating with God, praying, forgiving those who offend us, and so on. Those are divine laws. Although some of them are also moral laws. So a law can be both more divine and moral. So at the end of this session, you should be able to identify factual statements that are implicit value judgments. Then you should be able to distinguish metaphors from proverbs. When is something a metaphor and when is it a proverb? You should be able to understand vagueness, ambiguity, and equivocation. Then you should also be able to understand the various senses of law. Remember to do all your textbook exercises on metaphors, proverbs, vagueness, ambiguity, equivocation, and the senses of law. Now, I'm hoping by now you have bought your textbooks. You should be doing the exercises in those textbooks. Because unless you do exercises, just reading these things as theories, I'm not sure how far it will go into your system. It is exercises that drive these lessons into you so that when you are doing your assessments and examinations, you don't have any difficulty, passing. You will also receive your slides on your previous platforms. Now, I used to do this, but I've stopped it. Then log into your Sakai platform to ask all your questions and we'll attend to them. Any questions? Are there any questions before we close? So it's a fairly simple, it's a fairly simple class. I don't think that there's anything we've done that is complex. Okay, so I'll post the video on your Sakai platform, and anyone who has missed this class can go and watch the video. Meanwhile, I'm going to leave you so that you attend to other classes and then other businesses. We shall see on when? Friday. Today is Wednesday. So in 2 days' time, we'll be having our next class by this time, by 8. So good luck. Have a nice day.
Thank you, sir. Sir,
Yes?
please, I want to ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Please, under the vague sentences, I'll see what I can do be considered as a vague sentence?
I'll see what I can do. Well, it's somehow vague. Once it is clear to you that you use that to, you use it to, once it is clear to you that you use it to tell people off, or you use
Yes.
it to stop being disturbed, then it is actually fulfilling a function of vagueness.
Okay. Okay, sir.
That's good. All right. So that's it.